Hi, my name is Jackson Krebs. I am 11 years old and I'm in grade 6. I live in Airdrie, Alberta, and I am Jewish. Being Jewish is a very big part of my life. I enjoy the special holidays our culture celebrates, as well as the community of people that I have grown up with. In December, we celebrate Hanukkah, where we play games and receive money and gifts and eat good food. And in the summers, I get to go to a summer camp with kids from all over the province and learn more about my heritage. My family has an incredible history and experienced great hardship in the Second World War during the Holocaust, where almost all my family was killed by the Nazis. This story has played a big role in shaping the values I've been raised on and continue to guide me as I grow up into the person I want to become. In the early 1900s, my great-grandma Rachel lived in a small farming village called Butla in Poland. She was the third oldest in a family of 9 kids. My family did not have very much money, but were self-sufficient by gardening potatoes, keeping a few cows and horses, and selling cut trees from their land to people who needed it. My great-grandmother's mom died when she was a teenager and left my great-grandfather and 4 kids behind. In those days, it was customary for a man to be remarried if his wife died. And when my great-grandfather eventually did, he had 5 more children. The second oldest of these children was Oscar, and this story will follow him through his count of events during the Second World War. Oscar was born in the spring of 1926. He recalls growing up in Butla in a strict home where they did not have much. His family of 11 lived in a 2-bedroom house on a farm. However, by the time he was born, some of his siblings were already married and no longer lived in their home. He grew up playing barefoot, and because he was a boy, was lucky that he, along with other Jewish boys in that community, got privately tutored by a Jewish teacher that the Jewish families paid to come from out of town and teach their children. He remembers his mother baking challah, a type of bread for the poor, on the high holidays so they had food to eat. He remembers that the only gift he would receive for the holidays would be a pair of shoes or a pair of pants.
Every family had an oven where you bake your own bread, and they used to bake little loaves of bread separate. It would be my friend and me, we would go out and give it to the poor people so they would have something to eat for Shabbos.
So you make challahs, separate challahs.
Separate challahs for the poor people to give it away. We also used to go to the river. We had a river running in front, not far from our house. We used to go in and catch fish. My mother, when she had a big dish where she was mixing the bread, would be a little left on the side. We would put in big rocks and put it in the river, and the fish would crawl in to eat. And then we would jump in, pick it up, the whole thing, take it out, and get all those fish. And then we had fish for Shabbos. We even caught fish enough so we could have for the winter time. They would dry them out so we could stay for the winter.
Do you remember playing games with your friends?
Well, games we played only on a weekend, on a Saturday, which we had only one day, and that we were not allowed to because you run around and you ruin your shoes. Like shoes, actually we were going barefoot. We couldn't afford to have shoes. The only shoes they bought is for the holidays or Shabbos to go to the services. You put on shoes. You couldn't go without shoes to services. You had to be dressed. For your high holidays, we had a present. Somebody mother or father would buy me a pair of pants or a pair of shoes. That was a big treat. You didn't just go out in the store and buy what you wanted. Mother used to milk the cows and took the milk, put it up where it's warm, so the milk would get sour on the bottom, would be cream on top. The cream we would collect and put it in a special thing they had where you make butter. And the butter they would go into the big city and exchange it for salt, sugar, or clothing.
Shortly after Oscar's bar mitzvah, a celebration for 13-year-old Jewish boys, the Second World War broke out. At this time, Hitler and the Nazis had begun to place unfair blame on the Jewish people for the economic state of Germany and wanted to kill all Jews and other people seen as weak or inferior to create a master race or an Aryan race. Restrictions were put on Jews which made them not allowed to work in certain professions, own property, or travel. This meant that a teacher was not able to be brought to teach the local children because travel restrictions. Because of this, Oscar and the older children in the town taught the younger children the teaching that they had learned in previous years. In the beginning of the war, Oscar considered his family lucky, as their area was occupied by Russian soldiers who were known for being nicer than German soldiers. But in 1941, when the Germans took over Oscar's town, everything changed. Jews were only allowed to leave their homes if they were wearing an armband with a star on it, so they could be easily identified. Then their personal belongings began getting confiscated by the soldiers: jewelry, livestock, and money. Eventually, they had very little to live off of. In 1942, Oscar's family was told that they were soon going to be moved to Turkey, and because of this, Oscar's mom told him to run away.
I was about 16 years old, so naturally anybody was older than boys, they were afraid that they were going to take him away, working camp and suffering. So they wanted me to run away and go to Shanka and meet my two sisters there. So I couldn't get out, but in order to get out, I jumped out the back window with a pail in my hand, and I told the guard that I was going to get potatoes from the field. The field was close to the bush. Mm-hmm. And when I got to the field, they watched me. When I came close to the bush, I ran into the bush, dropped the pail, and ran away. They were looking for me, but they couldn't find me.
Over the next few months, Oscar lived on the run and in fear. He lived from place to place, sleeping where he could and eating what he could. At one point, he was pretending to study at a school during the day and propping the window open slightly during the day to be able to sneak in later that night to sleep in warmth. He eventually made his way to Budapest, where he hoped to get freedom, as he had heard that Jews were getting fake passports of dead Hungarians that matched their age and description. Unfortunately, while he was waiting to be matched to a passport, he was arrested and brought to a holding center where he was tied and beaten for information. After about a month in this holding center, Oscar and the other prisoners were taken by train to Karish Maza, a holding camp where men and women were segregated. After about a year, Oscar was then transferred to Sheger until the spring of 1944, when he was transferred to Auschwitz. Oscar recalls a 3-day train ride to Auschwitz and then waiting another 2 days once arriving for his train car to be received by the German soldiers, because there were so many people being sent to Auschwitz. Once out of the train car, people were filed through and asked their age and their health. Women, children, and the sick or elderly were mostly sent to the left, and strong, healthy men were sent to the right. Knowing this, Oscar, being only 18 at the time, lied and said he was in his early 20s to assure being saved. Luckily, he was. After being sent to the right, he was told to remove his clothing and that he was only allowed to keep his shoes and his belt. He was sent to tables and was issued a striped cap, shirt, jacket, and pants. He was sent to shower and was instructed to dip his shoes in a tub of sanitizer, and lastly, his head was shaved in a reverse mohawk. After a week in Auschwitz, Oscar and a group of men were shipped to Kirshner, a working camp, a day's train ride away from Auschwitz. When he got there, the head of the camp gave a speech.
And when we got to Kirshner, we had same thing all over again. They unloaded us, they marched us into the camp. When we came into camp, the Lagerführer, he was a German. He was actually, the reason he was there, he was a murderer. He got caught murdering, killing people. But he was the Lagerführer. And he was a son of a bee. He just enjoyed to kill somebody. So we had an appel. They counted us, and he made a speech. He says, from now on, you forget your home, you forget your family, you forget your name, who you are. You got a number, and that's all you are. You go by the number, you're called by the number, and the Gross Rosen is your home. But if you die here or get sick, to Gross Rosen you go, and that's the end of it. Gross Rosen was the head camp for all the camps in that district.
Kirshner is where Oscar spent the rest of the war. 6 days a week, him and the other prisoners woke up, were counted, had a little coffee, were counted, were separated into work groups, were counted, went to work, were counted, ate soup for lunch, were counted, went back to camp, were counted, ate soup for supper, were counted, went to bed. The one day off a week they had was Sunday, and Oscar recalls it being worse than working days, as they would be counted many times and forced to work out, and were beaten by guards. In 1945, the Russians invaded Germany and took over Kirshner. At the time, Oscar was in Shomo, an infirmary. Workers that were expected to only be ill for a short amount of time were sent, and one morning he woke up to the camp being abandoned. As the soldiers and healthy workers were marched out overnight as the Russians were coming. Realizing they were alone, Oscar went out in search of food for him and his friend, who was also in Shomo. Over the next few weeks, Oscar and 3 other men marched as far from the front lines as they could, but with doing that, brought less food. They eventually were found by Russian soldiers who brought them to Berlin, where Oscar was eventually assigned housing in a displaced person camp in West Germany. After some time, Oscar heard word that my great-grandmother was still alive and was living in another displaced person camp in Fehrenbelt. As quickly as he was able to arrange it, Oscar traveled to Fehrenbelt and found where Rachel was staying.
When I came to Fernwald, there was a camp. It was fenced around all around, but in the front, you walk in and there were guards, police, like Jewish police, part of it, so nobody could come in. And I asked him where my sister is. They say, oh yeah, they gave me the street number. It was streets and it was quite large. And they told me where she lives. That will be a little tough, so be prepared. When I walked in, my brother was a shoemaker. He was working in the corner making shoes. He made shoes from scratch. He used to buy the leather and make shoes. So I walk in, I had a coat on, and sit down beside him. And he thought I was a customer. My sister was she was feeding the baby in the next corner. I said, don't you know Mr. Wu? He says, do I supposed to? I knew him well. He was a friend of my brother and everything. I said, oh, that's too bad. And I turned to my sister, I said, you don't know me? So she says, oh, maybe that's the Sheen Ahmed. That was her name. So she dropped the baby on the bed, lucky she was in bed. And that's how I found her. Now she was hiding out with my brother-in-law in dugouts where we used to live. But then the lady that owned the house from the dugout, she used to, in the summertime, she used to go out her mind, and she would go out, kiss the fields and everything. And they were afraid that she might tell people when she was. So they went in the bush and they were hiding out in the bush. They left to the poor.
Unfortunately, the rest of their family had been shot and killed. After reuniting with Rachel, Oscar lived with them for a while, but wanted eagerly to leave Germany and all of the horrible memories he had there. In 1948, the almost 22-year-old Oscar applied to move to Canada as an orphan child and again lied about his age and claimed he was 18 years old in October of 1948. Oscar sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to Canada on a ship called the General Stewart. During the 2-week journey, he worked in the kitchen as a helper. He landed in Halifax and traveled by train to Winnipeg, then on to Edmonton, and finally came to live in Calgary, where he lived the rest of his life until he died in 2012. The Holocaust was from 1939 to 1945. In the Holocaust, millions of people were sent to concentration camps and approximately 11 million people lost their lives. 6 million of them were Jewish. The other 5 million were Gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, people with disabilities, and anyone else who stood in the way of the Nazi-led Germans. This project has taught me the power that a person's words can have. Although it can be for the good, in the case of the Holocaust, it was for the bad. But even after everything my great-uncle has went through, he did not hold hate in his heart against Germans, and through that he has taught me not to not judge someone on their culture or color of their skin, because everyone is their own person.
Well, the message is, one message I always tell them, forget about the color of the people, forget the religion, take them as a human being, and everybody deserves to live. And you go in the water, there are a mix of fish, all different fish, big ones, small ones, good ones, bad ones. The same thing with people. You can go to jail and meet people, and you will find out lots of them are okay.